Welcome. As you will all see, I am not Michael. He's decided to go off to concert tonight instead of doing a gospel conversation, so I'm filling in for him. We have Lent 5, we have John chapter 12, and we have Kelvin. Welcome from Anderson's Bay.
Thanks.
Nat, welcome from St. Peter's in Dunedin, and Mannie with us from Hadlow in Mountain. Right, Kelvin, I look at this passage and think it's really a bit odd. Some Greeks arrive and suddenly Jesus starts talking about dying and tossing glory all over the place. Can you help us understand what's going on?
Well, one of the things we've got to get our heads around is that when it was written, John didn't have chapters. So this is a little section taken out of the middle of a more complete story. And the story really is, it begins with the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, which immediately precedes it. And it follows into the Last Supper. So this is a little segue between those two events. In them, John is making a very significant point. You get the triumphal entry, and every Jewish person who saw that knew exactly what it meant. It was a fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah, where the Messiah would enter Jerusalem riding on a donkey. And this was known to almost everybody. So the crowds tumble out. Of course, they are expecting a Messiah who is made in their own mold. And they're thinking, now's the time. The fireworks are going to start. You know, the civil war's here. I'm ready to join the army, and all of this stuff. So you've got that very clear, I guess you could say, political statement by Jesus, this symbolic act. And then you have the Last Supper, and John uniquely starts his account of the Last Supper by telling us about how Jesus removed his clothing, put a towel around his waist, and started to do the task that was reserved not just for a slave, but for the lowest of slaves. This was the worst job that anybody could be asked to do in the first century in the Middle East, wash people's feet. And these two are connected together, that the way Jesus is going to be a Messiah is not the way anybody's expecting. And you have that sort of illustrated, some Greeks, that is, people who may not know the prophecy, come to the two disciples who have got Greek names, the most accessible ones, and say, we want to see Jesus. And then Jesus launches into this bizarre sort of symbolic speech when he talks of plants falling to the earth. And that's his way of saying that if we wish to see the Messiah, we're going to have to look for something that we don't expect. That the Messiahship of Jesus is going to be manifested in his death, which Jesus knows is going to happen in a very few short days. And there's more to it than that, though, because if you really want to see Jesus, we need to get rid of our own preconceived ways of seeing the world, which is what the word repentance, metanoia, means. Thinking again, seeing again. And if the Greeks really want to see Jesus, they're going to have to get rid of their old ideas and embrace a whole new set of ideas. This passage is John's way of telling us all that Jesus's Messiahship is going to be very different. And if we want to understand it, we too are going to have to allow God to make us very different.
So it's a background, but it's also some fairly powerful challenges in there already.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Nat, a challenge that really struck you in this?
Definitely a challenge, because it's asking us to, as Kelvin said, stop living the way the world works, because that's not the kingdom of God. The very seed that falls to the ground must die. It's a sacrifice beyond anything most people can handle. It transcends the material. I mean, both the Greeks and the Jews and the Romans were incredibly materialistic when you think about it. There were very few true mystics, and they were the ones that had to live out in the deserts, or the oracles and things. And this is what Jesus is saying. He's being a mystic. He's being an oracle of something that very few people could get their head around.
Okay. Mannie?
Yeah, thank you, Kelvin, for your very detailed introduction. And Nat, I love the fact that you mentioned the Greeks, Romans, and the Jews. What struck me as a bit of a challenge is the fact that John could have mentioned any other people. In fact, he could have not mentioned a nationality or a group of people by name, but he specifically mentioned these people as being Greek. I found it challenging because why did he need to single out these people at this time? I did a bit of digging and I found out that this is not just a throwaway point. There was some significance to it, perhaps pointing to the future direction of Christianity. The Greeks may symbolize the future mission of Christianity going beyond the Jews and the people who were Jesus' followers.
Kelvin, apart from what you've already told us, what else is challenging?
Well, I get challenges in what this challenge to allow my my way of viewing the world to be continually challenged by Jesus. We you know, I'm like everybody else, continually seeing the world through my own lights. And that's what stops me seeing the truth, to be challenged continually, to allow myself to be transformed so that I can see what Jesus is calling to me to. That's my challenge.
So given that this is heading towards the part of the gospel where it's all pretty sad, and this is clearly a challenging passage, where do we find the good news? Mannie.
Verse 24, which reads, "Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds." That is amazing good news for us. And I go back to what Kelvin was talking about. If we want to see Jesus, we need to look for something we do not expect. And we are being reminded that new life comes out of what we perceive to be a death, a dying. We bury a seed in the ground and we forget about it. But when we come back, we get something bigger, better, and that produces a lot more abundance. And it was that reminder of what Jesus was going to go through. Yes, he would die, and he told his followers that he would die, but he was going to come back. And his coming back was going to bring forth fruit and abundance. That's the good news for me.
There can't be many conversations where the good news starts off with, "We're going to die."
Yeah.
Kelvin, good news for you.
I strongly echo what Mannie's just said. That the death is not about an ending. It's about breaking boundaries so that something bigger can happen. And the metaphor of one seed in the ground, which gives rise to dozens, hundreds of other seeds. And also the saying, when I'm lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all people to myself. And I think part of the reference to the Jews, to the Greeks too, is about the Messiah he arises from a Jewish context, but that's about to be smashed, not the end of the Jewish nation, but to open it up to people who had no idea that they were going to be given this wonderful treasure.
Wonderful. Nat, have they left you anything?
Oh, mine is where God talks to his son.
Yeah.
Again, it's because Jesus says, "Father, save me from the hour." No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Now, that's something that every one of us should be saying. Every one of us. And then this voice came, "I have glorified it and will glorify it again." And the crowd didn't hear it because they weren't listening to the voice they weren't relating to God. And so often when we are in these awful times, every one of us, it's okay, God, I will glorify you because you're worth glory. I like this bit.
I'm intrigued that no one's really picked up the whole glory theme again, because that's always a word that's really intrigued me. Don't suppose any of you have something there lined up for the so what section on glory? No? Okay.
No.
What were you thinking, Nat, for so what?
So what? So what? Glory. Everything is glory. As Kelvin and Mannie were saying, the seed that we've forgotten about gloriously grows. Christ brings people to him by being lifted up through his cross and his resurrection. That's the so what. It keeps happening. You don't get sidetracked with what we think life might be.
There's some focus there. Mannie, so what? I
Uh,
love
I'm good.
I
Yeah,
love
so-
having you on this, Mannie, because you're dealing with kids all day, every day. Yeah, so what?
So what? I'm a very cautious person, and I tend to, sort of think things through. And I think, like most people, I'm concerned about outcomes, and I worry about how things are going to turn out. And this passage, really and truly, as we've talked about, is a challenging passage because it is talking about death, and the death is not the end. So what? Well, we are promised that from what we perceive initially as being a negative, a dying, the glory that's going to come from that is, as I mentioned earlier, and other people have echoed as well, it's going to be a fruitful multiplying of the goodness that was to come. Jesus knew he was going to die, and he made sure his disciples were prepared. He didn't just leave them to be floundering. And we are, living our Christ-filled life not because of his death, but in spite of the fact that, he died, he rose again. So what? We're being reminded that let's not look at the world. Let's not be cautious. Like I said, I'm a cautious person. Throw away some of the caution sometimes. Have the faith and the belief to know that out of what we see as being negative situations, sometimes there's a lot more good that'll come out of it.
That's invigorating. Okay, Kelvin, last word.
The so what for me is the intense practicality and reality of these passages. I'm a person who can be tempted to live in my head, and where my Christianity can be a set of ideas and ideals. But Jesus goes on a real donkey, eats a real supper, and washes real people's real feet, and goes to a real cross. And his very, I guess you'd say, profound words are lived out in his life of sacrifice. And that's what I'm called to too, to make my Christianity not just some set of ideas, but lived reality amongst the people around me and in the places I find myself.
Even if it hurts.
Well, Jesus says it's more than hurt, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But thanks so much for coming and being part of this today.
Yeah.